Welcome. I'm Jeff, and I am, gonna host this live stream. At this point, it looks like we have a couple people joining on, and so I just wanted to spend, however long people are interested in watching, to answer any questions about teaching online. I know that there is, um, you know, uh, I know there are a lot of people who are kind of being asked to move their classes online to kind of go into this territory that they may not be comfortable with. I know a lot of my friends who are teaching in K through 12, where schools are shutting down, are just in a situation where, you know, they're having to do stuff online when they weren't anticipating to, and things like that. And so I have experience doing that, so I just wanted to try to, give what expertise I could in that place and answer any questions that people might have. So I'm going to start by just talking a little bit about my background, what I've been doing, where I'm coming from, and then just a couple things to start out. And then as people join, if you have any questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat. And I can answer those questions for you. And we'll kind of go from there. So I am an instructional designer by profession. And so it's exactly what it sounds like. I design instruction. And so currently I work at YouTube as a contractor. So I work on a team that helps create training for internal teams in the organization. And I've been doing that for about 6 months. Prior to that, I worked at a graduate school in Pasadena. And my primary role there was helping faculty members transition their courses from being face-to-face courses to online courses. And so, a lot of that work was helping people get comfortable with using the technology and using the tools, helping faculty understand what the differences were in teaching online. And so, that is where most of my experience is at. The first 5 years I did that as an instructional designer, and then I took on a director role where I helped faculty do the same type of work, taking their classes and making them available through online teaching. So, before that, I was at a Boys and Girls Club where I did curriculum development and teaching there. So created curriculum and taught it for students who were teaching or for students in the program, members in the program. And so, I originally started out doing that just by taking curriculum that was already written and just teaching it. But I also developed some of my own curriculum. And so I put together a science program based on a kit that I was able to buy online that covered physical sciences and things like that. So I've been doing instructional design and curriculum development now for close to almost 10 years at this point. Loving every minute of it. So I was originally going to create a video last night, and then I ran into technical problems and couldn't get it posted. So I'll kind of start with what I was going to say there, and then I'll go into a couple other things that I think would be helpful. And then, as questions come up, I'll answer those. But the main thing that I want to say is that in the midst of all of this uncertainty, I know that it can feel really daunting. I know that it can feel really crazy, trying to quickly move from teaching in person to teaching online. I think the one thing that I'd want to say first and foremost is that you can do it. I know a lot of it is coming without preparation, and I know that for a lot of people, it's like kind of entering into this new space. But I've helped people who are really tech savvy, who know this stuff inside and out. And I've also worked with people who literally don't know how computers work, and I've helped them all become successful at teaching online. So it doesn't matter what type of experience you come in with technology, or how to teach online or experience something like that, you can do it. Because at the end of the day, teaching online is still teaching. And so, if you know how to set good learning objectives, if you know how to measure outcomes, and if you know how to give your students the instruction they need to meet those outcomes, you're basically 90% of the way there to being an effective online teacher. And so just know that the differences really are in, obviously, the biggest difference is obviously the medium. You don't have people with you live in a lot of cases while you're doing this. And so that's obviously a big difference. But when it comes down to it, the basics of teaching are still the same when you are teaching online. So you're still using those learning objectives of your guide. You're still trying to hit outcomes that you want to have measured, and you're still giving your students the instruction they need to meet those outcomes. The difference is just how you set things up and things like that. So one of the things that I wanted to start out with and talking about is just kind of thinking about how do you kind of approach this problem in the first place. And so there's a book that came out called Designing Your Life that's really about thinking about design thinking. If you are interested in that book, it is this one right here. I actually got to work with Dave Evans when I was doing my work in Pasadena, and he's a really neat guy. But one of the things they talk about in design thinking is how you approach problems. And one of the things they talk about is how do you distinguish between the types of problems that you're trying to solve? And one of the types of problems that they talk about are anchor problems. And anchor problems are things that you cannot change. So, for example, if you're trying to build an aircraft or a plane, you can't change the laws of physics to make gravity disappear. Gravity is an anchor problem. You have to work around that. You can't try to tackle that and solve the problem of gravity. It's kind of the same thing that we're dealing with here, is that I think for a lot of us, there's kind of this hope that we wish this would just go away, that with everything with the coronavirus, there might be thoughts that it's an overreaction, or that this isn't a serious problem. We should just be meeting back at school. And I think what I would say to that is that's an anchor problem. For most of us, the reality is that for the time being, this is the new normal. And so it seems like a really small thing, but understanding that that's an anchor problem hopefully starts getting some other anxiety out of the way, because when you realize that's not a problem you can solve, it starts opening you up to, okay, knowing that that's not something I can change, what is something that what is something I do actually have control over and that I can change effectively? And so I start with that to say, as you're approaching online teaching, the other thing I would say is, if you're familiar with Carol Dweck's work, and if you've done any type of educational study within the last 30 years, you have almost certainly heard her name. She's the one who talks about a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And in case you're not familiar with that, a growth mindset is simply just believing that you can grow. If you believe that you can make a difference, that's having a growth mindset. A fixed mindset is believing things the way they are never going to change. And so the other thing that I would say is that as you're approaching this problem, if you come into it believing that you are not going to be able to teach online well, you are going to fulfill that prophecy. That is absolutely going to come true. The best way that you can approach this is saying, you know what, this is something I can learn, and this is something I can do. And it's why I want to start by saying this is absolutely something that you can do. Your level of tech expertise doesn't matter. It's your ability to teach that matters. And if you are a good teacher, you can teach online. So I want to start with those. And if you're wondering why I'm not talking about specific tools or things like that yet, it's because that's really the main challenge I've seen people needing to overcome, is just the idea that you can do this and it can be an effective way to teach. If you're closed off to that, or if you are not willing to embrace that, then you're not really going to have a good experience teaching online. It's just not going to work. So I start with that because a lot of it really does start with mindset of just, how do I approach this? How do I make this work? By the way, if you hear a dog barking in the background, or you hear a loud cries, that's probably my kids and my dog. So I'm in my office right now, and I don't know how many of you are in the LA County area, but we just got put in a shelter-in-place order, and so I think for most of us, it's all everybody hunkering down in their rooms. And so, okay. So some specific things to think about. So when you're teaching online, I want to start out with first the challenges, because I'm sure that's what a lot of people are thinking about. The biggest challenge, obviously, is that you don't have the same immediacy that you have in a face-to-face classroom. And so you don't have immediate input from students. It's, harder to do back and forth. I say that not because you can't run. Even in something like this, where it's, a live session where people can talk back and forth and things like that, you still don't have the same type of immediacy. The type of impromptu conversations that happen in the back and forth is all mediated through, some type of technology. And there's always a little bit of latency that comes up in that. And so even if, we had multiple people on who were all talking on video, like in a Zoom call or something like that, if you've been in like that type of video conferencing, you still have those situations where it feels like there's miscommunications, because there's just that little bit of latency that means that immediacy is not there. So that's just one big challenge I want to name. And we'll talk about some ways to overcome that. The other thing is that it's very easy in online learning to feel isolated. So I have 2 master's degrees. I tell people I have 2 master's degrees because I'm not that smart, and I couldn't figure out which one I wanted. And so my second master's degree was a Master of Science in Education. And for that one, that was a fully online program. First time I set foot on campus was to graduate. And that was through Purdue University. And so first time I set foot on Purdue's campus was the day that I graduated. And so, so I come at this both from the experience of having helped teachers teach online classes, and also being in the situation where I was the one being taught through online classes. And so I can tell you that feeling of isolation is real. You lose that sense of connection that you have with your classmates, and you lose, to a certain extent, some of the connection you feel like that you have with your professors as well. Those, I would say, are the 2 biggest things that you kind of lose in online education: the immediacy and the kind of community that feels like it's inherently built into face-to-face classes. On the plus side, the thing that online education lets you do, and there are ways to overcome those challenges. So I put that aside for a minute just to say, what helps with online education is that it's a little bit like being able to put yourself on videotape. You only have to do things once, and then you can replicate it multiple times. And so, so rather than, in a classroom, especially if you're in K through 12, instead of having to go through 5 periods every day, you're having, to repeat the same information 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 times in a day, you can just do that once. You basically just teach your class once, and then you replicate it for all of your students. The other thing is that there are things that you can automate. And so depending on the subject that you teach, there's usually a lot of tools out there that will let you auto grade things, particularly if you're in math and sciences. That's an easy thing that you can do. English is a little bit harder, but there's still even some things there that you can automate as well. And really what online really the benefit that you get in online education is that you're giving your students a little bit more flexibility, and you're giving yourself the opportunity to be able to have things be a little bit more personalized and individualized. Now, I say that in ideal circumstances. That would be if you had months to build out a class and do a lot of planning at the beginning so you could kind of strategically think through those things. And I realize that most of you are not in that situation. You probably have a week maybe to try to figure out how to do some of this stuff. And so this is what I would say. Depending on where you're at, you probably had some type of lesson planning already that you were doing or something like that. And I would say the best thing to do is don't try to make drastic changes. Obviously, there will probably be things that you're planning on doing in person that were better facilitated in person and things like that. But what I would say is don't feel like you need to throw out your entire playbook and try to completely redesign the rest of your course to make it work online, because that's just not going to work. What I would say is figure out the things that you have in there that can still work. And so any type of lectures, if you have an LMS system through a learning management system through your school, there's probably ways to upload that way. If you don't, things like Google Classroom or even Canvas at instructure.com will allow people to create their own course sites for free. And so those are just some things to think about too, in terms of tools that you can use. But what I would say is figure out what instructional material you can keep, and know that you only have to do it once. So, if you're a K through 12 teacher with two preps, essentially you can create a video, the videos for each one that you need that can be your instructional content. And then whatever activities you were going to do. So, if you're an English teacher, there's probably reading that you're going to have to assign. There might be essays that you're going to have to do. Those things don't necessarily need to change. Those are all still things that you can do even in an online format. I'll get into a little bit of how you do the classroom interaction, but if you're doing math, most likely you had math problems. Check textbooks, check the things that you already have available as resources, because there may already be online components available. In fact, they may be things that you already use. But even so, there's often ways in your learning management systems that you can even create those problems within the tools themselves. And so know that that's an option. I know that the arts and music are particularly difficult cases, and so I'm going to pause on those for a minute, because that may actually be a situation where you probably have to rethink a little bit about what you're doing in your classes. But for kind of the core educational stuff, in most cases, you are probably going to be able to keep those things the same in terms of like the actual assignments and the instruction that you were going to do. I think one of the places where you're going to run into challenges, and some tips I can give you there, is what do you do about classroom interaction? So again, I would point again to the learning management system that your school may have. There's almost certainly forum capabilities in there. That's a pretty standard feature that comes with most learning management systems. But even if you are at an institution that doesn't have that type of thing, Facebook groups can work really well for that. If you're familiar with a tool called Slack, that gives you a way to do invite your students in to use that. And then you can set up different channels and actually in some ways run the entire class out of a Slack workspace. So it's originally been intended for work teams to be able to collaborate with one another. But you could certainly use, people have used it far beyond that for things that don't fit into that use case. And classroom management could be a way to do that. It's not going to give you all the features of a learning management system, but it's going to give you some key features in terms of interaction interaction and being able to collaborate that you might not get with something like a Facebook group or something like that. It'll be a little bit more organized than a Slack workspace too. That's also completely free. It's not something you have to pay for. So yeah, the thing to think about when you're doing classroom discussion is that there's a couple things that you can do. And my recommendation, as odd as this may sound, is probably to try to do those things asynchronously. So in other words, synchronous would be what we're doing right now, a live stream where people would be able to hop on and ask questions and do all that type of stuff. That's great. It's also really network intensive. And so if you're in an area that doesn't have great broadband or great internet connection, doing things synchronously gets really hard. Even if it's something where somebody can connect on a mobile device, it still gets really difficult. The other thing I would say too with that is there are tools that let you do synchronous things. So doing Facebook Live, doing YouTube live streaming, those both work. They're a little bit harder because the interaction is in some ways a little bit one way. So I can't have multiple people connecting through this, all being able to share their video. It's just, I basically have to respond to chats that come through. But there are tools. You have, Google Hangouts that would let you do video conferencing with one another. And then there's other products like Zoom. Now, the problem with Zoom is that to really get the most out of that, you have to pay for it. Now, I haven't looked into it, and so I could be wrong about this. It's possible Zoom has given, I know that a lot of businesses are starting to give things away for free to educators to be able to use those things. In light of the circumstances, Zoom may be one of those companies. I'm not sure. There is a free tier of Zoom, but that limits you to just 40-minute meetings, and that may not be, it's probably shorter than most periods would be or most classroom sessions would be that you would have. And so, but there are other challenges that come along with using synchronous video, things like that. So one thing I talked about earlier was that latency issue. It's even though everybody's in the same room at the same time, there's still kind of that lag that happens, and it's a little bit hard to manage that. But the other thing, one dynamic that I'm sure you're familiar with when you teach face-to-face is that you have students who, you have your extroverts. Great, there you go. Zoom is offering perfect. That's great. That's exactly what, thank you, Tim, for for marking that. So yeah, so Zoom, so you wouldn't have to worry about the limits and about if you're using Zoom. But one of the things to think about is that if you teach face-to-face, you probably have your extroverts and your introverts. You have your people who are comfortable talking, and you have your people who need time to think and need time to work through those things. And one of the things that online teaching gives you too is flexibility, that it lets people do their work on their own time. And so one of the things that I might recommend is seeing if you can host your conversations asynchronously. And so doing them through a forum conversation. And it may be, if you have written assignments already that you're having your students do, that could be a way to redirect those assignments, is have them be forum discussions instead. But I think there's two things that happen when you do that. One, I think you get more thoughtful responses because people have more time to put more thought into the things that they're trying to say. And then two would be that for your students who need that time to think through things and who are more introverted in your class, you are kind of giving them a gift, because you're actually letting them express themselves in ways that they probably don't necessarily feel comfortable doing in a classroom environment. And so, so that would be a recommendation I would have is try hosting some of what you might normally have done in a live classroom discussion. I would maybe try doing as an asynchronous discussion. And give your students a little bit more time to think about things. So, if it's something where you might have had students, be reading a chapter or reviewing a particular subject or doing something like that, rather than expecting them to do all of that in a day, give them a few days, maybe 2 or 3 days to think through it, write it, and then respond to other students in your classes. You'll be surprised at what type of interesting thoughts you get. The other thing that you get through that, and again, if you're a K through 12 teacher, you probably generally know your students pretty well already. But in some cases, you see a side of students that you wouldn't normally see from them by allowing them to kind of write that way. The other thing I would say by doing forum discussions too is that you don't necessarily have to have your students just doing writing all the time. So if they want to upload images, if they want to record videos that they can upload and things like that, it gives you some opportunities to have your students express themselves in different ways. What I would say for that is put down guidelines for all of that. So if students are going to write something, probably don't make it more. So at the higher ed level, I would say no more than 250 words. You might want to make that less if you're teaching in high school. And obviously, if you're teaching elementary students, probably even lower than that. And then if they're going to record videos, I would say have them do something that's in like the 90-second range, which is not a lot of time, but it helps your students be concise. It's a good way to have them practice public speaking and saying, here's how you keep things really concise. And so that would be another recommendation that I'd have for that. So, so just kind of taking a step back and recapping for a little bit. As you're thinking about taking your face-to-face courses and moving them online, again, don't try to reinvent the wheel, especially if you're in a situation where it's like you have a week or two to try to make these changes. Don't feel like you have to throw out everything and start over from scratch. There is probably already a lot in your lesson plans and your curriculum that you can still use. Know that if you're creating things for your class, you probably only have to do them once. Again, just once per prep period. You don't need to, create individual videos for every single class. You can do it just per subject area. Also know that most of the, writing assignments that you're doing, homework, all of that type of stuff, you can still generally do probably the same ways you've been doing it before. The difference is that you're going to collect those things probably through your learning management system, or again, something like Google Classroom, a Facebook group, Slack, something like that. And then when you're thinking about discussions, know that you have two options. You can do it synchronously or you can do it asynchronously. If you're going to do it synchronously, you can use something like Zoom, Google Hangouts, something. But just know that it's going to be a little bit more one way if you do something like that. And then know that you have asynchronous options available too, things where you can let people craft their own answers, think about it. And be able to kind of have that interaction that way where it's not all happening at the same time. So, I think there's more that I can say. I might pause for a little bit. So if anybody who's connected has questions, feel free to throw them into the chat. I have a couple books, but my guess is that most people aren't going to have time for reading books right now. You're probably going to be more focused just on trying to actually think through your classes and stuff like that. But if you find yourself having time for that, I have a couple book recommendations that are helpful for that. So other things to think about. So what do you do if you are teaching something that's like music, art, something like that? Music in particular, I'm thinking of, I was in band when I was in high school, and I have an uncle who taught orchestra for like 30 years. And so one of the things, obviously, that you can't do if you're a music teacher is just have, you can't have band practices like you would normally have, or orchestra practices or things like that. So my recommendation would probably be trying to think through what are the things that you can still facilitate through online teaching. You probably have too many students to do things one-on-one, but is there a way that you can meet particular sections of your music groups? And what are the other things that you can teach that are going to help your students become better musicians? that they can still practice on their own. I think one of the things that's really hard with music is that is one where it's a little bit more dependent on your students actually, going through and practicing. That's kind of an issue anyway with music, just as it is. But now when you're thinking about having to do things online, that obviously gets more challenging. But one of the things that was really helpful for me when I was a music student, even as a high schooler, was trying to figure out more things about music theory. That actually really helped me understand like what was happening in other parts of the orchestra and other parts of the band and things like that. So one of the things that I might say is, what are those things that you can teach your students that they may not know already, that you haven't necessarily had time to teach them about? And if you want them to have fun with that, there's a podcast called Strong Songs that I listen to. It's run by a guy named Kirk Hamilton. And what he'll do is he'll actually break down pop music and talk about why it's good music. But what he does with that is he actually gets into music theory. And so he's actually even done some episodes that get into some basics of music and, how do time signatures work? How do key signatures work? All that type of stuff. So it gives you a way to kind of have another resource that you can rely on while also filling in some of the gaps and giving your students a little bit of fun and something to do that's kind of engaging them that way. With art, or any other type of arts, in thinking about theater, obviously that's a little bit hard, but this, it'd be interesting to think about having, students do something like this, where they need to do something creative and perform it online, if there's not a way to perform it elsewhere. Obviously there's some concern. You have to think about concerns in terms of privacy and things like that. So it may not be something where you share it publicly like this, but it might be something you share through an LMS or another group or something like that. But trying to think creatively about what are the ways that you can still engage your students in the subject, even if it isn't what you would have traditionally taught them while you were in the classroom. In terms, if anybody teaches art or anything like that, another thing to think about it, cameras are your best friend. Your students can still draw things, getting into digital art, maybe something, that all depends on having the right technology, which is obviously a huge concern. But even having your students practice things, again, if they have a smartphone or something like that and can record themselves going through the motions, drawing something and sharing with that gives you a way to kind of give feedback and things like that. I think the arts are in particular an area where I would normally say it's not a great way to teach people online. But there are still things that you can do that help your students become better at whatever craft it is they're trying to learn, even if it's not what you might have specifically taught them how to do anyway. So just thinking through those things. So I think that's what I can cover on that area. So I was originally going to go for an hour, but I think I might cut it off there unless there is anybody who has questions that they want to ask or anything like that. So I'll wait a couple minutes just to see if anybody has questions or anything they want to ask. Otherwise, we will probably end the stream there, and then if anything else comes up, I can do another live session like this. So Flipgrid, tell me more about that. What do you mean by Flipgrid? I'm not sure I'm familiar with that. Might try to search it too and see if I can find something on that. There you go. Okay. So it looks like, okay. So it looks like that's kind of that looks like a really interesting tool. So Yeah, so based on what I'm seeing, it looks like it's potentially like a learning management system. Um, okay. I'll get to that question in just a minute. Yeah, it looks like so it looks like Flipgrid is it looks like it's a I need to Maureen, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll do a little bit more research this and see what I can figure out about it. But from what it looks like it's kind of like a learning management system that's hosted by Microsoft. And so it looks like it's a way to their emphasis is on social learning. I From what little I can tell of the platform, it looks like it's mobile friendly and things like that. I want to look into it a little bit more and see what distinguishes it from others. But it looks like it has like a library of resources that would be available, and it looks like one of the main things is just trying to help students feel more connected to one another. So I'll look into that more, and then I will give you a response on it. Okay, so biggest concerns was assessing students, especially in like math and science. Yeah, that's a good question. So I think particularly for something like math. So my guess is that because I would say my immediate thought when it comes to math and sciences is that those tend to be easier subjects to assess because there's typically an objective answer to it. In other words, like 1 + 1 is 2 and things like that. But I realize that there's probably a more of a concern of how do you actually have students show their work. Particularly I would imagine for more advanced, for probably some places in biology, there's areas where you would need to actually show your work and things like that. With math, there's, again, once you start getting into algebra, geometry, proofs, algebra 2, all of that type of stuff, you probably need to be able to show your work more. I would have to do a little bit more research on that to kind of see what's offered, but my understanding is that most learning management systems include in some cases the ability to be able to essentially have students do their math problems that would be on an assessment, grade it, but then also include the ability to kind of show the work that they've done with that. And so my first thought would be checking out whatever learning management system is that the school uses, if they have one, and seeing what's available. In the event that that's not available, again, Canvas, so that would be, I'll go ahead and I'll type that into the chat. The place to check out Canvas would be canvas.instructure.com. My understanding is that I know that there's math functionality that comes basically in being able to build quizzes and things like that. You can put that in there. In an absolute most dire scenario, one of the things that I would say is that you can always, if it's possible to have students either take photographs of the work that they've done or things like that, it's not the best solution. But if there's a way to have them like type it into a Word doc and submit that and email it over, something like that, that's an option. For students who feel like they can't even do that, just have them handwrite it. But I would imagine that most in the quiz functionality of most LMSs, there's almost certainly going to be functionality to have math problems that can be auto graded. So, and I realize I'm focusing on math right now, but that is typically one place where it becomes a lot easier to assess those things online because computers are giant calculators and can do all that work, and so it's easier for them to figure that out. So my first thought, assuming that for a math instructor, they need to be able to see the work that the student is doing, and let's say they build something in Canvas and it doesn't give them the ability to do that. Essentially what you can do is you can have the math problem that would have essentially the ability to auto grade it. So what the the question and the answer, and then below that you could put in what's essentially an essay answer saying, okay, please show your work. And that can be the student writing out the process that they went through. Again, it's not ideal, but that's the best solution I can think of if it's something where students need to show their work. For something like science, again, I think that's going to be something where just using quiz functions, the flexibility that they need to be able to kind of create those questions. For sciences, I think what could be more complicated is if there's things like labs that they have to do, and especially thinking about like safe labs that they could do or things like that. I don't have a good answer for that other than saying Khan Academy would be one place to check, but I would honestly probably do a Google search and see if there are online interactive tools that teachers could have their students use to be able to go through some of those motions, and at least have them try to do that. I don't know if there's a great way to assess that, unfortunately, but that's I'll think about that more and see if I can come up with something better. But particularly in thinking about just like exams that students would need to do or things like that, most of that is going to be able to be handled by a learning management system's quiz functionality. And that's even something I can create a video on how you would go through and create those types of things and how that would work. So hopefully that helps. But that's kind of like the immediate thought I have, particularly for those two subjects. So. Any other questions that anybody else has? All right. Well, if there are any other questions, feel free to reach out to me either through my page or leaving. I think there should be a way that I can post this video later for other people to look at. And so feel free to post comments on that or just post comments on my YouTube channel page because I'll be able to see them there too. And yeah, I think we'll go from there. Thanks. I will do another session probably next week if there's anybody else who wants to join and ask questions. But otherwise, I hope you all have a great night, and I will talk to you later. See ya. Let's see. When will we have the next one? I could probably do one early next week, or maybe I might even do a poll. Like, is over the weekend? Would that be useful? I don't know if doing this weekday or weekend it would be better. But yeah. Yeah. I can do one probably in the next couple days if that's useful. Yeah, I could probably do one early next week. That would probably like Monday or Tuesday would be my guess. But if a weekend works, I'm happy to do that too. Perfect. I will post on my Facebook page, and then I'll probably schedule a couple other events. So I might do the one this weekend, and then do another one early next week. So I'll plan on doing that. Cool. So I'll try to post times, and I'll probably try to post times at different times too, so that it's not always like 7 at night, just in case there's, I know people's schedules are different and things like that. So cool. All right. Well, again, if any other questions come up, feel free to post them on my page or post them on my channel. And yeah. And if you feel like there's anybody else who would find this useful, feel free to share it with them as well. So, all right. I will see you all next time.